In Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46, before we go into chapter 20 of the Revelation, I feel like that we need to stop here and just take a moment and talk about the separating the sheep from the goats. I've been promising this for some time now, and really we can really sum it up in just a very short statement, but we'll talk about it a little bit. But beginning with verse 31 of Matthew 25, said, "When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say, Come ye, blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was an hungered, you gave me meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, and fed thee, or thirsty, and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungered, and you gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you took me not in. Naked, and you clothed me not. Sick, and in prison, and you visited me not. Then shall they also answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, or athirst, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister unto thee? Then shall he answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you did it not to one of the least of these, you did it not to me. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal." Now, as we talked about this, he said he will separate the sheep from the goats. He'll put the sheep on his right hand, the goats on the left. There has been a conception of this, that this at the end of the age when Jesus comes, that he will just line everybody up, everybody on the face of this earth, and they'll come through a line, and he'll separate, put the good people on his right hand, the bad people on his left hand. But he was really talking about a little bit more about the last day, about Revelation. We compare this with Revelation 19 and Zechariah chapter 14, talking about the day of the Lord when Jesus comes again at his second coming. We're not talking about the rapture of the church, which we're looking for to happen at any time, and this will not be the time. There are people, they are amillennialists. Now I want you to hear what I said. They are not millennialists, but they are a-millennialists. And these people believe that there's nothing going to happen except that Jesus is coming again, and immediately the judgment will follow. The wicked will be cast into hell, and the righteous will be caught up into heaven to be with Jesus, and that will be it. They don't preach or teach a millennial reign, or the Battle of Armageddon, or the tribulation, or any of the events that are to follow, but they are called amillennialists. And we hold to the pre-millennial dispensation, so to speak, and we believe that when Jesus comes to take his saints away and the graves open and the saints are raptured, that immediately after this the great tribulation will take place for 7 years, and then Jesus will return with 10,000s of his saints and the holy angels, And when he comes, that he will fight a battle against Satan. We call the battle of Armageddon, against the devil, the false prophet, and the Antichrist. And he will overcome the Antichrist, put them into the lake of fire. He will bind Satan for 1,000 years. But before Jesus can ascend his throne and reign as King of Kings and Lord of Lords in his earthly kingdom, he will judge the nations. And this is what we call separating the sheep from the goats. These are the nations that are still alive on the face of this earth. And let us go into that here on page 74 of the lesson. Said many times Israel's leaders questioned Christ's authority, and he affirmed that God had given him authority to execute judgment because he is the Son of Man. You can find this John 5:22. And Christ could claim no greater authority than the authority to judge man, for the one who sits in judgment is superior to those being judged. Since Christ will be judge of all men, obviously then he is superior to all. In anticipation of the glory that shall be revealed at the second advent, or the second coming of Christ, Christians are prone to forget that the one coming as King of Kings and Lord of Lords is also coming as judge. And before he can establish his kingdom and ascend the throne and rule here on this earth, he must remove every obstacle to his reign. John 5 affirmed the fact that Christ has the right to judge, a right that was conferred upon him by the Father. Matthew 25 describes the judgment which Christ will execute when he comes to this earth the second time. And the time that this judgment will take place is found in Matthew 24, verse 29, and he declares that it will be immediately after the tribulation. If we look at Matthew 24 and 29 quickly, it tells us that immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, the stars shall fall from heaven, the powers of the heavens shall be shaken, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, and he shall send his angels with a great shout of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. So Matthew tells us that it will be immediately after the tribulation that Jesus is coming again with his saints. And by this time in Revelation, I'm sure that I've mentioned this many times, that we should know the difference between the rapture of the church, which is the first advent, and the second coming of Christ, which is the second advent. The second coming is not the same as the rapture of the church. There are people that get this confused, and without understanding this, we just cannot understand the revelation. As we studied last lesson, that this fact that there are two comings or two advents is still a stumbling block to the Jews. They don't understand this, and so we must understand that there is a difference between the rapture of the church and the second coming. And therefore we should know the difference between the judgment of the nations in Matthew 25 and the great white throne judgment that will take place in Revelation 20. This will be the last judgment, and we will study that in lessons to come. This will be an individual judgment of all involved with Israel when Christ comes to set up his kingdom on the earth, or to set the millennial reign will begin. And this will not be the judgment. I'm talking about the judgment of nations. The judgment of nations will not be the judgment of the wicked dead. But here he is separating the sheep from the goats, or judging the nations. Matthew states that he will separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. Matthew 25 and 32, as far as Matthew records the incident here, there's not a word spoken, but a shepherd controls his sheep by the movements of his hands. If one of his flock gets stubborn or rebellious, or refuses to obey the signals of his hand, then he brings his rod and his staff into play. And here Christ is seen as a shepherd of his flock and is doing the shepherd's work. And with a motion he separates the sheep from the goats, putting the sheep on his right hand and the goats on the left hand. And following the Oriental custom in the Bible times, the right hand is the place of privilege or of blessing, and the left hand was a place of separation. When Jacob wanted to bless his two grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, he was careful about which hand he placed on which son, because their destiny would be determined by which hand was placed upon them. Because the right hand indicated the heir, and if he had put his right hand on Manasseh, he would have been elevated to the position of prominence, and Ephraim would have been relegated to an inferior place. So he carefully placed his hands by crossing them to put the right hand on the right son. This is found in the account of Manasseh and Ephraim being blessed by Jacob. And the purpose of the judgment of the nations is to determine who shall enter the millennial kingdom. This is found in Daniel chapter 7, verses 9 through 14, also verse 22, also Revelation chapter 11 and 15, and to give the meek the earth as promised. The Bible tells us in Psalms chapter 37 and 11, also in Matthew 5 and 5, he said, the meek shall inherit the earth. And this is one of the promises, and this is the time and that they will receive the earth. And the sheep and goats were allowed to feed together by day, but at evening the shepherd would separate the sheep. Every night they were separated, and this is true of the people of this world. For he said to work while it is day, for the night cometh when no man shall work. And this means that the day will come that the Lord will separate unto himself his people, which are a peculiar people according to the Bible, and he will separate himself a people from this world. And the reason and basis of the judgment of the nations is found in Matthew 25 and 40, where he said, inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of these my brethren, you have done it unto me. God will curse or bless according to how men have dealt with Israel. Throughout this series of lessons in the last 7 months I've been teaching this, I've been saying that there will be people left here on this earth. We studied about the Jews or Israel being driven out of Jerusalem and fleeing into the mountains into a place called Petra, and there they were to be protected, to be fed, to be cared for by the countries that were friendly with them. And this is the time that Jesus will judge the nations. And we can really just boil this down just in one statement, you might say. In conclusion, we shall see that the sheep are those who have dealt good with Israel in supporting her, protecting her, and feeding her. And the goats are those who have oppressed and persecuted Israel. These will be the living nations still on this earth when Christ returns. Some will be allowed to enter into the millennial kingdom, and these are referred to as sheep, while others, or the goats, will be cast into everlasting punishment. And he's talking about nations. The judgment of nations are those that dealt kindly with Israel and protected them. And I don't believe just during the tribulation, but I believe that over the years, those that have been friendly and have protected and have worked with Israel and been for Israel, because the Bible is filled with many scriptures. Paul said, pray, he says, my heart's desire and prayer for Israel is that they might be saved. The psalmist David tells us to pray for Israel, for he said, they that pray for Israel shall be blessed. And I hope and pray that the United States will forever back Israel and in whatever they do. If they don't, I'm afraid we'll be in trouble, but I hope and pray that they do. And so that's so much for the sheep and the goats. Let's go back now to Revelation chapter 20 and continue with the revelation. In chapter 20, verse 1, we'll be talking about the binding of Satan. I mentioned this briefly the last lesson at the conclusion, but in reality, the first 3 verses of the 20th chapter is still a part of chapter 19, or still a part of the Battle of Armageddon. For here we see in 20 and 1, he said, "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after that he must be loosed a little season." Now verses 1 through 3 is actually a continuation of the Battle of Armageddon. And let us look back to Isaiah 24, 21, and 22. He said, "And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall punish the host of the high ones that are on high, and the kings of the earth upon the earth, and they shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and shall be shut up in the prison, and after many days shall they be visited." This was found in Isaiah 24. Isaiah predicted the time that Satan and his angels would be confined to the prison. The kingdom age that had been prophesied of for so long by so many is now seen as becoming a reality. And God's great enemy, who is called Satan, the dragon, and that old serpent, and the devil, will be taken into custody by an angel, bound with a great chain, and cast into the bottomless pit, or the abyss, or the abyss, however you would pronounce this word, and seal the entrance to the abyss for 1,000 years. Now, I don't know whether you've ever studied this before. I've heard it talked about several times when we talk about Satan and the dragon and the serpent and the devil. And most people brush by these lightly and just say that this is just another name for the devil. Well, that's true, but there's a reason for it being there. He used all 4 names because it took all 4 of them to show the greatness of the wickedness of Satan. And so when we look at these terms here, he tells us that he talks about Satan is called Satan, he's called the dragon, he's called that old serpent, and the devil. And the term Satan means adversary. This is God's adversary, and the adversary of God's people. The Bible tells us that our adversary, the devil, walketh about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And so he is referred to as an adversary, and it is derived from the Greek word satanas. And is used in this passage, it refers to the adversary of God, or God's arch enemy. In other words, God's greatest enemy is Satan. And so it refers to him as being an adversary of God, and his doom was sealed at the cross and is being fulfilled in the vision that John is seeing here in chapter 20 and verse 1 of the Revelation. In other words, when Jesus died on the cross of Calvary and he spoke these words, he said, "It is finished." That means that the sacrifice was made once and for all, and that he had put the head of the serpent, who is the devil, under his heel. For the prophet spoke and said that his heel will bruise the head of the serpent, and he will put all things under his foot. And at that time Satan became a defeated foe. And so since his doom was sealed at the cross, and it is being fulfilled in this vision, the time has come that he is going to be bound, and he will be loosed after 1,000 years for a short season, and then he will be cast into the lake of fire, and he will be doomed eternally forever and ever. And he knows even this day that his time is short, and I believe that he's working harder now than he ever has to deceive the people of this world, and he's doing a good job of it from the looks of the world today. But I'm thankful that the Bible tells us that God will have a peculiar people throughout all ages, and I'm thankful that I am a part of the church of the living God today. And so Satan is God's adversary, and then he used the term the old dragon, and the term dragon from its original text means a mythical monster. In other words, a monster. There was a myth that they spoke about, the dragons, and some of us have probably studied about the great soldiers that would go out, and the brave men, and slay the dragons and win their damsel, so to speak. This was the myth that this derived from, that there were dragons. And so the dragon means a mythical monster, but it also means a large serpent, and it is derived from the Greek word drakon, symbolizing keen power of sight. And he is the extreme personification of cruelty and evil. And so the devil is symbolized as having keen power of sight, and he is also symbolized as the dragon, as being the extreme personification or the extremity of all cruelty, or everything cruel and everything evil. And the term serpent is alluded to in Scripture as mostly evil. Any place that, except one or two places, it refers to as being evil. It's treachery, it's venom, it is skulking, it's murderous proclivities, and etc. Its characteristics are concentrated in being the arch adversary of God and man. In other words, he is the cunning deceiver of men from the very beginning of history of man. We find the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, how that he came and deceived Eve, and she in turn deceived her husband. They committed sin and were expelled from the Garden of Eden. So we see that he is very cunning, and he is a deceiver. He is the master deceiver, and if he could, he would deceive the very elect if possible. And so his history shows us that he deceived men in the beginning, and he will seek to destroy and deceive until he is finally conquered and destroyed and cast into the lake of fire. Now the term devil, we use this quite frequently. The term devil means an accuser and slanderer, and this comes from the Greek word, and some of you are going to be surprised because you thought this was Spanish. The word diabolos comes from is a Greek word, and the term devil comes from this, but it is also used as Spanish, I believe. Diabolos, which we derive the English word devil from it, and it should only be applied to Satan as a proper name. And though some frequently but wrongly apply the word devil to mean the same as demon, there's a difference between demons and the devil. The Greek word daemon to the devil, also the daemon means demon, but there's only one devil, but there are many, many demons or evil spirits, and these demons or evil spirits are the fallen angels that sinned with the devil and were cast out of heaven, and that they were cast out with him, and they are waiting in chains of darkness, according to Jude, and according to 2 Peter, they are waiting in chains of darkness until the judgment day, but not to be judged, but to be destroyed, or but to be cast into the lake of fire and to be punished forever and ever. And so we must not use the term devil when we're referring to as demon spirits. The devil is the devil. He is the chief evil spirit. He is the authority over all of the demon powers. He is the prince and power of the air, and he is the ruler of this world, because he has not been cast out of this world yet, and he is ruling and reigning, and he is the prince of this world, and we can see the effects of his reign and his influence throughout the world today. And the Bible tells us in the last days that things would get worse, and we can look around and see that it is getting worse. But we have a consolation that he said this, that he said, because iniquity doth abound, he said the love of God shall much more abound. And so it tells me that because there is more sin, more evil in the world today, it just tells me that God has just poured out more of his love and his grace in this last day, and it is possible to live for God. I get tired of hearing people say they can't live for God. It's just too hard. It's impossible. I can't do it, but that's wrong. You can do it, and you can have peace and joy and happiness in serving the Lord, because the Bible promises this, and all we have to do is accept it and believe it, and it is ours. And so, when we see that the devil is going to be cast in the bottomless pit, what better way could the age to come, or the millennial reign to come on this earth? What better way could this begin than to have Satan expelled and bound? And this is according to God's consecutive order of events, that all things will be accomplished in their correct order, and that his divine plan will be fulfilled. We have studied from the beginning of this series that the book of Revelation is to be understood. It is to be studied in consecutive order. In other words, chapter 1, chapter 2 follows chapter 1, chapter 3 follows chapter 2, and so on, throughout from 1 through chapter 22. And we can study it one chapter following another, and we don't have to jump back and forth and get everybody confused and wonder where we are. But this is in accordance with God's plan, and it can be accomplished in its correct order consecutively as we study tonight. Now, it tells us here, John said, I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. I like to think about this. I was visiting with a friend the other day that is also in law enforcement, and we can talk about going out and arresting someone and bringing them in chains and handcuffs, leg irons, and whatever else you can find. Sometimes I've seen them brought into the jail wrapped up with barbed wire. Now, you talk about being bound. They brought a fellow in from a community not far from here, just a little ways up the road, and the men that arrested him didn't have their handcuffs with them. They got a piece of barbed wire off of a nearby fence, tied this man's legs and hands, and brought him to jail. It worked. He didn't give them any trouble. They brought him right in. But here it says that he saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And so let's talk about this angel. Some hold to the idea that this angel is Christ, because the Bible speaks of Christ in Revelation 1 and 18. It speaks of Christ having the keys of death and hell. But Jesus tells us, the Bible tells us, when Jesus rose victorious, that he was given power and victory over death, hell, and the grave, over all things in heaven above, all things on this earth, all things beneath the earth. But here he's talking about an angel. But however, this angel of this passage is designated only as an angel, who is an authorized agent or a messenger angel, so divinely empowered that it seems that when he lays hold on Satan and binds him, that without the slightest hint of a struggle. In other words, when he puts the handcuffs on him or the leg irons, he takes this chain and he binds him, that Satan submits to him and comes along peaceably, and he puts him into this abyss, the bottomless pit, and he locks the door, he seals the door, and he is to stay there for 1,000 years. Now, the bottomless pit is, this pit is an entirely different place than that of the lake of fire, which we have talked about and we will study about as being the final judgment. For the Bible tells us that death and hell will be caught up and will be cast into the lake of fire, where the devil and his angels are. The false prophet and the beast will be there. And so the lake of fire is the place of eternal damnation. And the bottomless pit here we studied about in previous lesson, the place where the demon locust came out of the pit. And so the place into which Satan is imprisoned or bound is referred to as a bottomless pit, from the Greek word abyss, meaning an immeasurable depth, or the underworld, the lower regions, the abyss or the abyss of Sheol, or the lowest place of Hades, the lowest place of hell, is where he's going to be bound for 1,000 years. So, at this time in Revelation, Satan will be cast in the eternal lake of fire until his last futile attempt to defeat God and claim the earth and universe for himself. We find in Revelation 20 and verse 10. So, it tells us that he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil, and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him in the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. After that, he must be loosed a little season. So, here we're talking about the bottomless pit, and the abyss does not appear to be a permanent place of eternal punishment, but it seems to refer to lowest hell, a deeper pit in the depths of Hades, a prison for the disobedient angels, demons, and foul spirits. The Old Testament prophets refer to this place as Abaddon. From the Hebrew, we find in Job 26 and 6, also in 28 and 22, and Psalms 88 and 12, Proverbs 15, 11, and Proverbs 27 and 20. He speaks about this pit. This is probably the same angel that opened the door to the abyss to release the demon spirits or demon locusts at the sounding of the fifth trumpet that we studied in chapter 9 of the Revelation. And the demons cry out against being confined to this pit because they are familiar with and they fear the power and authority of Jesus Christ. In other words, they know that they are already judged and the time has come for them to be cast into the lake of fire. And this is the reason that they cry out against being cast into the pit, into the abyss. And so before John continues with the millennial reign of Christ, he makes a short reference here to the loosing of Satan for a little season, but the actual study of the results of the loosing will not be until we reach verses 7 through 9, which will be studied a little bit later in this series of lessons. So let us look at the millennial. You know, this is a time that we've been looking forward to. And you know, time just runs out real quickly when you're teaching. But the millennial reign of Christ is the time that we have been looking forward to for many years. And we've studied about it, we've talked about it, and it's going to be a great day when the saints will reign with Christ for 1,000 years. There will be peace on this earth. There will be no sickness. There will be no sorrow. There will be no sin, for the tempter will be bound. The only sin that will be there will be that carried over from some of those who were not allowed to enter into the millennium. And the Bible tells us that those that sin in that day will die as it will be as 100 years old. But here let's look in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 6, 7, and 8, and 9, and 11. It said, "The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. And the cow and the bear shall feed, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox, and the sucking child shall play on the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the cockatrice den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. To it shall the Gentiles seek, and his rest shall be glorious. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand against the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcast of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Again, in Isaiah 65, verse 17, he said, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered nor come into mind. But be ye glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem a rejoicing, and her people a joy. And I will rejoice in Jerusalem, and joy in my people. And the voice of weeping shall be no more heard in her, nor the voice of crying. There shall be no more thence an infant of days, nor an old man that hath not filled his days. For the child shall die 100 years old, but the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed. And they shall build houses and inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit of them, and they shall not build and another inhabit, they shall not plant another eat. For as the days of a tree are the days of my people, and mine elect shall enjoy the work of their hands, and they shall not labor in vain, nor bring forth for trouble, for they are the seed of the blessed of the Lord, and their offspring with them. And it shall come to pass that before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb shall feed together, and the lion shall eat straw like the bullock, and dust shall be the serpent's meat. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, saith the Lord." Now, the opening of chapter 20 is a continuation of chapter 19. The Battle of Armageddon does not end until Satan is bound and cast into the bottomless pit to await his loosing for a little season. After the 1,000-year reign of Christ on this earth, the first resurrection will have been completed at this time. At verse 6, "For John saw thrones, and they that sat upon them. These are the overcomers, or the saints that will rule and reign with Christ during the millennium as kings and priests, and will be given authority to judge the world." In 1 Corinthians 6 and 2, Luke 22 and 20 tells us that the saints, the overcomers, will judge angels. They will judge the world. And this word judge could be looked at not to judge to say this one will be saved and this one will be lost, such as this. But judge in the Old Testament also means ruler. The judges of Israel sat in the gates of the city, and when people had problems, they went to them, and they judged and made decisions for them. and help them with their problems. In other words, we will reign with Christ as kings and priests and rulers and judges. In other words, we may get to sentence some of them as judges also, but we know that the wicked are already judged and will be cast into the lake of fire. We know that the devils that sinned, or the angels that sinned, are already judged and are waiting the lake of fire. But I hope that we have a hand in that. As a matter of fact, I would like to be there and have the privilege of just getting to help kick the devil into the bottomless pit. And even better than that, I would like to be there and just to give him a swift kick or a boot when they cast him into the lake of fire once and for all, and be done with him, never to be tormented by him again throughout eternity. Now the first resurrection will be completed, and we will be given authority to judge the world. And the tribulation saints that enter the 1,000-year reign with Christ consist of all saints that are caught up at the rapture, and everyone that were taken to heaven during the tribulation week, including the tribulation martyrs and the 2 witnesses. The souls of them that were beheaded or martyred received a notable mention in this passage because they had the witness of Jesus, which was referred to as the testimony in chapter 19 and 10, and held to the word of God, refused to take the mark or worship the beast and bow to his image. Therefore it is stated that they will live and reign with Christ 1,000 years. In this passage, John simply makes a statement that these make up or complete the first resurrection. Now, the wicked dead are those who have not met the requirements to be called blessed and holy, and were not in the first resurrection. The statement here very definitely infers that there is 1,000 years between the first resurrection and the second resurrection. And verse 6 declares blessed and holy are those that are in the first resurrection, and that the second death will not affect them, but the saints of God in Christ are already judged and will have the privilege of reigning with him, with Christ 1,000 years. This clarifies the meaning of the 2 resurrections. First, the resurrection of the righteous, and then 1,000 years later will be the resurrection of the wicked. And the name Millennium is derived from the Latin words, which has a scriptural terminology referring to its length. The milli means 1,000, and annum means a year. You put these 2 words together and you have 1,000, and this is where we derive the word millennium. And the word pertaining to years is found 6 times in this chapter, referring to the binding of Satan and imprisonment in the abyss, the reign of Christ with his saints, and the loosing of Satan at the end of the 1,000 years. The millennial kingdom is called by many names, and some of them are the dispensation of the fullness of time, according to Ephesians chapter 1 and 10, the kingdom age, according to Daniel 2 and 44, that day, according to Zechariah 14:9, the kingdom of his dear Son, according to Colossians 1:13, and it can be referred to as the sabbatic year, or the 7th day, or the day of rest, and it could be the mediatorial, or the day that Christ will sit on his throne and will be the great mediator. And there are other names, they're too numerous to mention concerning that day. But when we look at the millennial, verses 4 through 6, he said, I saw thrones, and they that sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in his hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. And verse 6 said, Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. And then we will go back, as John told us, that in verse 3, that after the 1,000 years should be fulfilled, and after this Satan will be loosed for a little season. And next lesson we will study the battle of Gog and Magog and the great white throne judgment, and finish chapter 20 of the Revelation.